If you're thinking about moving to Oklahoma City, in my experience, there's a pretty good chance that you've either never been to Oklahoma City, or maybe you've been here before or lived here at one point, but it's been several years. So chances are you probably got a lot of questions, which is how you ended up on this channel. So in this video, I'm gonna answer a lot of the commonly asked questions that I get in hopes that it helps you fill in some of those gaps. So let's get into it. Hey guys, I'm Jonathan Knight, and on this channel, I talk about all things Oklahoma City and all of the surrounding suburbs. Now, normally in this point of the video, I try to give a little additional context to the topic for that day, but today is a little bit different than normal. We've got a bit of a mixed bag, and we've got a lot of questions to answer, so I'd like to get right into it. But quickly, if you're thinking of moving to the Oklahoma City area, whether it's in the next few weeks or few months from now, listen guys, I would love the opportunity to help make a smooth move right here to OKC. So you're gonna find my contact information right down in the description below, so please feel free to shoot me a call, a text, or an email. Or even better, click the link below to schedule a one-on-one video call with me, or you can simply scan the QR code on the screen so that hopefully we can have a discussion about how I can help you buy that perfect home right here in OKC. All right, now here's a question I get kind of a lot, or some variation of this, and that is, Jonathan, what exactly do you do for fun in Oklahoma City? And the answer is kind of a lot of different things depending on who you ask, probably not too dissimilar from wherever it is that you live. I mean, we've got tons of different parks here. We've got lots of family activities and stuff for kids, like the Oklahoma City Zoo, or also over in the Adventure District, we got the Oklahoma Science Museum. And depending on the time of year, of course, we've got lots of different sports events we like to go to. College football is big here, so maybe you head down to Norman to watch an OU Sooners football game, or up to Stillwater to watch the Oklahoma State Cowboys. Now, of course, we have the OKC Thunder, so that's always an option. And additionally, we have a ton of different entertainment districts if you're into nightlife or, you know, restaurants, bar, that kind of scene. And there's kind of various monthly events that happen throughout different districts and suburbs. For instance, in the Paseo Arts District, they have, I believe it's a First Friday gallery walk. Over in the Plaza District, also in OKC, they've got the Live on the Plaza. I think that's the second Friday every month. If you head down to the south side of the metro to Norman, you've got the second Friday of every month. They have Second Friday Art Walk. And if you head over to the north side of the metro in Edmond, Oklahoma, on the third Saturday of every month, they have Heard on Heard, which is a cool little kind of mini street fest monthly hang where they have live music, lots of food trucks, tons of vendors. Overall, just a good time. It's great for families, or even if you're rolling solo. And we have various festivals throughout the year in the metro. So for instance, in Oklahoma City, we have the Festival of the Arts. That happens every April. Over in the Paseo Arts District, they've got their own arts festival every year. I think that's on Memorial Day weekend typically. And also another springtime festival that they have down in Norman is Norman Music Fest, which is really just kind of a festival that they have in the streets of downtown Norman with a bunch of different stages outside. That's just kind of a short list, but there's plenty to do here, I promise. So if you've got activities you're used to doing back in your city, I'm sure we've got some sort of equivalent here. Another question I get pretty often, of course, is, hey, Jonathan, what are the best suburbs in Oklahoma City to live? And of course, the answer to that question can pretty well vary depending on kind of the vibe of you and your family. If you like the idea of having a little more of a busy city of its own, Edmond's probably a good option. Edmond has almost 100,000 residents and tons of stuff to do, including a lot of their own restaurants, tons of parks, various entertainment, and they're also known for having great schools out there. Now, the downside is Edmond is a little more expensive than the rest of the metro. Median price point, for instance, is about $340,000 in Edmond versus around $270,000 throughout the rest of the metro. Of course, that's just the median price, but that's a good comparison. Now, maybe you like the idea of a little bit of a busier suburb, but you kind of like more of the college vibe or sort of artistic vibe. Well, maybe Norman is a good fit for you. Now, Norman is certainly not small. There's about 130,000 residents living there. And if you're a huge OU Sooners fan, it's obviously a great place to live to catch, you know, basketball, or during football season, catch football games. But for as much as people love Norman, Oklahoma, it does feel a little bit more removed from the metro, and hey, maybe that's a good thing. It's kind of out there doing its own thing. It's not too far to drive into Oklahoma City, maybe half an hour if that's what you'd like to do. Now, maybe you want to live in a suburb that feels a little more like an extension of the city. Well, Moore could be a good fit. Moore has got somewhere around 62,000 people living there. It definitely has all of its own restaurants and entertainment of its own. And truthfully, when you're heading south out of Oklahoma City, sometimes you may not even realize you've gotten into Moore. So it really kind of blends in. It's also a little bit closer to OKC. Now, if you're wanting to live in a little bit of a smaller community, but you still want it to have all the kind of city amenities and certainly close proximity to Oklahoma City, maybe Yukon or Mustang's a good fit. Or if you're looking to lean a little more into the direction of small town, maybe Piedmont or Choctaw rock tile would be a good fit. I've actually made a few much more in-depth videos about the OKC suburbs, so I'll put a couple of links to the most recent videos in the description just in case you want to dig a little deeper. And speaking of digging deeper, if you find yourself leaving this video thinking that you wish that you had just another resource to help fill in the gaps, well, I've recently made a pretty comprehensive relocation guide and I'd love to give it to you for free. So if you'd like a copy, just put Move OKC in the comments and I'll send it right over to you. Now here's a question I get reasonably often. I actually got it today. Jonathan, how hot does it get in Oklahoma City? And you know, by some people's standards, it can get pretty hot here, but that's also pretty relative. If you're asking me that question from, say, Phoenix, Arizona, probably not very hot by your standards. But to give us some perspective, in the summers here, we're easily going to see lots of days in the 80s and many in the 90s. And then there's always going to be a week, maybe 2 weeks worth of triple digits. I think the average is like 12 days annually. So I'm not going to lie, even though I've lived here my whole life, for me, those can be pretty uncomfortable. And if you're not used to those kind of temperatures, you'll probably have to get used to that. But overall, that might seem a little bit mild compared to some of the hottest regions in the US. Now, at the time of this recording, it's the end of August, and thankfully, this summer was not crazy. I think we maybe didn't even get 5 or 7 days into the hundreds. That's a good thing. These last couple years were super hot. Okay, similar question. Does it get very cold there? Once again, of course, very contextual, but you know, if you're living in Wisconsin, it's not going to seem cold at all. But for a lot of people, Oklahoma gets a lot colder than they anticipated. I think the average temperatures through the winter is like 40s and 50s, so from that perspective, it's pretty mild. I think the average temperatures through the nights are like in the 20s to 30s, but getting into like January and February, which are definitely the coldest times of year, it's not uncommon to see temperatures that drop into the teens, sometimes single digits, but it's really that Oklahoma wind combined with those cold temperatures that will really get you. Now, as far as snow, I think we see about 5 to 6 inches on average every year. Sometimes that's maybe one kind of bigger snow. Sometimes it's a couple of little dustings here and there. But the worst part for me, honestly, is the ice, which we see almost always with the snow. And then maybe once or twice a year, it's not uncommon for us to see ice storms. So the coldest parts of the winter can definitely be a little bit brutal here in Oklahoma. You've got kind of a wet, windy cold that really makes you want to get into spring. Okay, this seems a little bit random, but I actually get this question a lot. Jonathan, do you sell homes in Tulsa? And unfortunately, the answer is no. Tulsa is about 100 miles away. It's about an hour-and-a-half drive. But if you're leaning towards Tulsa, I definitely have a good referral partner out there, so let me know. I'd like to connect you. So I think part of the reason people ask that is because I have a couple of Oklahoma City versus Tulsa comparison videos. And the reason I make those comparisons is mainly because Tulsa is the only other major city here in Oklahoma. But the short answer is no, unfortunately, I don't sell in Tulsa, but I can connect you, so let me know if that's the way you're leaning. On another note, here in Oklahoma City, I do get the question, do I help with rentals? And the answer there is, again, unfortunately, no. I exclusively work in residential sales. However, I get that question enough that I've got a great referral partner here in Oklahoma City, and he's taking care of several of my clients if they're coming here to rent for a short period of time. I can definitely connect you with somebody here locally who's got access to several single-family homes. Now, if you're looking for apartments, it's kind of a whole other deal. By and large, here in OKC, apartments have their own leasing departments or leasing agents, and they don't really deal with third parties. But again, if you think you might come here to rent for 6 to 12 months before it's time to buy, I'm happy to make the connection. I do that in hopes that maybe I'll get the opportunity to win your business when it is time to buy. In the meantime, hopefully you found some information valuable on this channel. Now, the next one can come in a variety of different ways, but it typically looks something like, hey Jonathan, what sort of credit do I need? Or what kind of income do I need to buy this price of home? Or maybe how much do I need to save in order to buy a home at this price? And the honest answer is there's really no short answer to that question because it's really going to depend on a variety of different variables. In fact, there's a lot more to it than simply your credit score or your income or how much cash you have on hand to put down or pay the closing costs. A lender's going to consider things like your debt to income ratio and your length of employment. And if you're working in a specific industry, what's the job that you're going to be working out here and what's that pay? If your current job's allowing you to transfer out here, is your pay going to stay the same? And it's also going to depend on the type of loan that you get, whether that's conventional, FHA, VA. So for those reasons, I'm always going to recommend connecting with a lender if you're not already in touch with one. And sometimes, to be honest, some people are a little bit resistant to talking to a lender at this stage, but they'll say something like, don't worry about it, I've got great credit. I'd rather just kind of look at homes and see what I like, and if I find something, then I'll talk to a lender. And to be totally candid, and to help set proper expectations with you, if nobody said this before, that's the exact opposite of the way you should do this. And here's why. A credit score is, of course, an important variable in the equation, but a good credit score alone is not going to qualify you to buy a house. A lender's going to also look at those things I mentioned a minute ago, like your income, your debt to income ratio, and it's the combination of those things that's going to determine whether you qualify and really what your buying power is. And unfortunately, what I see a lot is people will come to me and say, hey, Jonathan, I want to buy a house, but I don't want to spend more than $350,000. And my first thought is, I love that you have a limit and that you're putting a cap on it. But my very next question question is always going to be, okay, cool, how did you arrive at that number? And what I found is that often it's based on some expectation that was set from some online calculator, whether it's just some standardized calculator or maybe the one that's built into Zillow. And so usually that's kind of based on what might look like a comfortable payment every month and what seems affordable, which seems reasonable. But here's the challenge with that. Oftentimes those online mortgage calculators can comically underestimate things like homeowners insurance or property taxes, and that's if they even consider them at all. They also often make assumptions about your down payment, so maybe it's assuming a 20% $70,000 down payment on that $350,000 house. Well, candidly, most people don't put that down. All that to say, that's why it's super important to talk to a lender to really get an idea of what your buying power might be and set proper expectations. Because once you fall in love with a bunch of $350,000 homes, if you can only qualify for $325,000 or $300,000, unfortunately those $300,000 homes are really never going to live up to the expectations of the homes you fell in love with. So on that note, two things. One, again, I'd love to connect you with a lender, but two, I know you're already looking on Zillow and Realtor.com, so in the meantime, if you happen to be browsing around before we get a chance to talk, I just want to give you some tools to help set proper expectations. So for those of you watching who aren't at the point where digging into the math makes a lot of sense right now, you're welcome to jump to the next section because that is a common question. But for the rest of you, why don't we hop into the computer real quick, and I want to give you a couple tools when looking at these mortgage calculators. Okay, so I've just got a basic mortgage calculator pulled up here, so you can pull up really any as long as you're using these tools. So in this particular example, we have a $400,000 purchase price. Now the first thing you might notice is that the down payment is set at an $80,000 down payment, so they are assuming 20% down. Now if you happen to know exactly how much you'd like to put down, you're welcome to put that in, but 20% is certainly not mandatory. In fact, most people are putting somewhere around 5%, maybe 10%, or as little as 3.5% for FHA, or even 0% with a VA loan. Once you're talking to a lender, you can have a conversation about what makes the most sense in terms of a percentage down. So for this example, I'm just going to put 5% in. All right, so once I put 5% in, that of course adjusts the loan amount. Now when I'm estimating an interest rate, I'm typically going to jump to mortgagenewsdaily.com, and I'll kind of nudge it up a little bit for whatever lenders might be pricing in. So in this case, I'm just going to put 6.5%. All right, now I'm going to skip down to the property tax and want to show you one example of where these calculators typically can get very off. So here in the Oklahoma City Metro, what I usually use is 1.35% times the purchase price, and that will give me a pretty safe estimate that no matter where in the Metro you live is going to be pretty well in the ballpark. So when we take 400,000 times 1.35%, we get $5,400, and as you can see, the defaulted amount in this calculator was $3,000 per year. So right out of the gates here, we're looking at a $2,400 discrepancy. Now dropping down to PMI, without getting too granular, PMI is just mortgage insurance that's typically applied by lenders when you're putting down less than 20%. Now if you're using an FHA loan, that is going to be 0.55%. I generally just plug in 0.55% because that is going to vary a little bit on a conventional loan depending on credit and a variety of different variables. So for this example, I'm just going to put 0.55, unless of course you're putting 20% down. All right, now here's a big one, homeowners insurance. Now I say this a lot on this channel, but in Oklahoma City, costs are pretty much lower than the national average across the board, except for homeowners insurance. And I'm just trying to be real with you. I want to be as transparent as possible and help set the best expectations. But usually the number that I'm using here for this estimate is I take the price of the home, I generally just move 3 decimals, or I remove 3 zeros in this case, and the number I'm left with, in this case 400, is the number that I allocate towards a monthly homeowners insurance cost. Then I take that times 12 to get my annual cost. Now usually lately, because insurance rates have jumped a little bit over the last year, I usually round that up even a little bit. So 400 times 12, we're talking about $4,800. I'm just going to round that up to $5,000. One thing to note as we're looking at that insurance rate is that new construction is going to be a little bit less. So if you're open to new construction, just consider that. Now you can see just at a glance that that is far off from the $1,500 that this calculator defaults. And here kind of lies the problems with the expectations that these calculators set. And it's also a really good reason why it's so important to work, in my opinion, with a local lender, because sometimes national lenders can be just as off as these calculators are when it comes to anticipating the cost of the taxes or the insurance. And then they end up overqualifying you for the home purchase price. And then when you go to crunch the numbers, you no longer qualify for that home. I just want to avoid all of that for you. Now dropping down to the HOA, here in Oklahoma on a $400,000 house, most likely in those communities, there's not going to be a monthly HOA. It would probably be somewhere between $300 and $500 per year. Now we can have a conversation one-on-one about what HOAs look like, but we're going to skip that field here for this example. And then we're going to select a loan type. If you haven't talked with the lender, maybe you don't know that. I'm going to leave this a conventional for this example, and I'm going to click calculate. Now I'm going to put on screen a side-by-side comparison between the estimate that we just did with 5% down and the adjustments to taxes and insurance. versus what the calculator was giving you with its defaults and the 20% down. And I hope you can see the difference that will make in terms of setting expectations. And I'm also gonna put a comparison on the screen with 5.5% interest, only because if you're open to new construction, there's actually lots of deals out there with promotional rates in the 5.5% range. And I want you to see the difference that can make in your payment. So all that to say, please take my advice and let me connect you to a lender if you're serious about buying in the near term. But also please use these tools if you're doing any sort of browsing online. I think it'll really help. All right, this one is definitely a common question. Tornadoes. Okay, that's not exactly a question, but there's some sort of question revolving around tornadoes here in Oklahoma. And I get it, that's a valid concern. So first I want to say I don't want to dismiss the real dangers of tornadoes, but I'd like to give a little bit of perspective if I may. So I'm 45 years old. I've lived in Oklahoma the overwhelming majority of my life. I was born here and I spent 1 year as a child in another state. Otherwise, I've lived here in Oklahoma City my entire life and 20 years here in the village. And in all of that time, I have never once been in a tornado. In fact, I don't even have a storm shelter in this house. So without getting into the nitty-gritty of it, we definitely have to stay aware here. From what I understand, we have some of the best weather technology in the world. So we usually know with a pretty good advance whether we're in a tornado watch, which just simply means we need to really stay aware. And then at any given point, if that elevates to specific danger in your immediate area, then your area would be put under a tornado warning, and that's when you're going to hear the sirens in your area. Now, every area has their own tornado sirens. Now, I probably hear my tornado sirens go off once every couple years, so they usually take some pretty good precaution with that because, again, that's never produced a tornado. But that's where you just want to make sure you've got whatever that safe space is for you and your family, and you get there when you hear those tornado sirens. But all in all, from what I've gathered from conversation with folks, we're not really experiencing tornadoes to the degree or frequency that a lot of people seem to think. And it's totally understandable. We've had 2 catastrophic storms come through the metro in the last 25 years, and so those pictures and stories are all over the internet. Definitely tragic, but truthfully it's not something I'm really losing sleep over. But again, I'm a little acclimated. I've lived here my whole life, but I hope that helps give a little context. Okay, now another question I get pretty often is, Jonathan, what does the cost of living look like in OKC? And honestly, this is a great question. I'm sure many of you have this same question. So I'm gonna answer this in a couple different ways. So the short version is Oklahoma City cost of living is still somewhere around 15% lower than the national average. And that is across the board when you average out all the costs. Of course, we've determined that homeowners insurance isn't one of those. But if you're hoping for a much more in-depth answer to that question, I would encourage you to come with me over to this video right here. And as always, guys, until next time, I certainly hope to okay. See you soon. See ya.